everyone, welcome to the Duval Homestead, where today we are making homemade sourdough bread. I'm Alexa, where I like to write about our homesteading, farm-to-table eating, and homemade natural living from our homestead here in Duval. You will need a sourdough starter that is active for this recipe. If you don't have a sourdough starter, you can go over to my blog, theduvalhomestead.com, and I write about how to create a sourdough starter from scratch. All you need is flour and water and some time. So create that sourdough starter before you start trying to make your bread. There's no instant active rising yeast packets for this recipe. Eating fermented grain gets you a lot of those live active probiotic cultures that are really gut healthy. Also, fermented grain is just easier to digest on your stomach as opposed to eating processed unfermented grain. Also, while you can buy a loaf of bread from the store, there's something that is just way more satisfying about making your own loaf. I will leave all of the details of this recipe step by step on my blog at theduvalhomestead.com, so don't worry about writing it down. I'll leave a printable there as well if you want to print it out. Once you get the hang of the process, it's really easy. Now, I do want to say a note about the measurements themselves. The best sourdough bread is made by combining the correct proportion of flour and water and sourdough starter together at the right temperature. So all of those things are hard to achieve sometimes, and you may not get it right every single time, and it may not be your fault. It might just be that you had a little bit of a heavy starter or your starter was too light. So if you want exact measurements, ideally you could use a scale and measure the weight of your starter, the weight of the flour, and the weight of the water so that you are sure all your measurements are right. I will leave a link to my friend Kristen from Dirt and Dough, and she has all the measurements by grams, so you can try that out if that appeals to you. I make homemade sourdough bread probably twice per week. It goes really well with grilled veggies, grilled meat. It's the perfect side to so many dinners, and we will make a whole loaf for dinner, and then we'll have leftovers for French toast the next day, or toasted eggs, or even sandwich bread. This process takes about 2 days to make a loaf of bread. The reason for this is you need a lot of time for the sourdough starter active cultures to create rise in your loaf of bread. So if you're short on time, this is not going to work. That's why you can get an instant rise packet or something from the store. I can't really speak to that because I've actually never used one. I love using our sourdough starter. It works really well once you get the hang of it. So if you want to have bread with dinner on, say, Sunday night, you would start this recipe on Saturday night. So I have a sourdough loaf that I started last night, and I'm also going to start a new one tonight. So we're gonna have bread 2 nights in a row so that I can show you the whole process of this bread. So you're gonna cook this sourdough bread over about 5 stages. Don't let that sound intimidating. I'm just breaking it down into 5 because that's kind of how I think of it, as what phase of bread are we in right now. So the first stage is making your loaf of bread. Start by mixing your starter and water in a bowl and whisking it together. So you're going to combine 3/4 cup starter, 1.5 cup water, a little over 4¼ cup of all-purpose flour, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And you're going to combine the flour and the salt with the starter and water with your hands. You do not need a bread mixer for this recipe. You actually don't want to over knead the dough. You want the air pockets to rise really naturally and not over knead it. So after you've done phase 1, you've made your dough, you're going to put your dough in a bowl and cover it with a tea towel. Just let it sit on your counter for about 30 minutes to an hour. Then you're going to start phase 2. Phase 2 is really easy. It's what I call the lift and tuck phase. So what you're going to do is you're going to lift the top of the dough up in one corner and fold it over the center. And you're going to rotate the bowl 90 degrees and do that 3 more times until you've gone around in a full circle. So slowly lift up the top and slowly fold it down. And what you're doing here is you're creating more volume in the bread, more air. And again, you don't need to overdo it with this. Just do it once all the way around. And then you're going to do that 2 more times, about an hour spaced apart. So if it was Saturday night and you wanted to eat this Sunday, you could do this, say, at 6 p.m. and then you could do it at 7 p.m. and then again at 8 p.m. Don't worry too much about the times. It's not like if you miss one, it's going to ruin the bread. This is just to make the perfect loaf. This is what I do, so don't fret over it. And it's not like you have to set a timer. It's just a matter of doing the lifting and tucking periodically before you let it bulk rise. So phase 3 is the bulk rise. Very simple. You're just gonna take your dough that's in the bowl, cover it with plastic wrap, and then put it in the fridge. And you're gonna let it sit in the fridge overnight. I got this overnight fridge fermentation tip from my friend Kristen over at Dirt and Dough. She has a blog post about how she makes bread, and it's a really good tip to put it in the fridge. I find that it works very well. Okay, so phase 4 would be the next day. So now it's Sunday if you want to eat this for Sunday night dinner. And I would do this around 2 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon, which is exactly when I'm doing it for this loaf. So you're gonna take the loaf out of the fridge and you can remove the plastic wrap, clear a spot on your counter and sprinkle some flour on the countertop. And you're gonna place your dough on the floured surface. And then you're gonna kind of shape your dough here. So it should have risen overnight. It should be a little fluffy. You're gonna continue with the lift and tuck all the way around 1 time. So do a lift and tuck on each corner, rotate it, and do that 4 times. And then do a little cupping action, which is where you kind of make a C with your hands and cup the side of the bread. And if you want, you can get some more flour on your hands. That makes this easier. And continue to twist the dough kind of at 90-degree angles until a nice dough is formed. Then you're going to flip the dough over, put it on the non-floured part of your countertop, and continue cupping until it becomes very tough on the bottom. So you're trying to create almost like a knot with the bottom of the bread so that it's got a really nice dough ball that's formed. Then you're going to put this in a Dutch oven that is lined with parchment paper and let it sit for 1 to 2 hours with a tea towel cover. Then you're ready for phase 5. Phase 5 is cooking your bread, finally. So you're gonna preheat your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want to preheat your Dutch oven as well. So while the oven's preheating, you want to remove the bread from the Dutch oven, place it on the counter to sit, and put your Dutch oven in the oven so that it's really nice and hot. Once the Dutch oven is preheated, you're going to take it back out of the oven. You want to score your dough. And you want to use a special knife. Now there are dough scoring knives available. We just use a serrated knife, which I find works just fine. And you want to do a quick motion with the knife to get that nice slit. You can do a couple of these. Some people get really creative. I find that 1 or maybe 2 is just perfect for us. Once the Dutch oven is preheated, you're just gonna put your dough with the parchment paper back in the Dutch oven and cover it. You're gonna cook it at 450 degrees for about 25 minutes. After that 25 minutes is up, you're going to remove the lid from the Dutch oven and put it back in the oven and cook for another 20 minutes. Now here's the final step, and this is the most important one. When your bread is done, take it out of the oven and admire it and get excited, but do not cut the bread. The bread is not done yet. You want to let it sit for about an hour. You can transfer it to a cooling rack and let it sit for about an hour before you cut it. If you listen really closely, you can hear the bread continue to rise and crackle and form. Put your ear up next to it right when it comes out of the oven, and that is why you know it's not done. Now, we have made this mistake before because we could not stand to resist it when we first started making bread, and we would cut the bread, and it actually deflated the bread quite a bit, and it made it not last as long, so the next day it wasn't really very edible. So don't do it. Let it sit for an hour, give yourself plenty of time, and then when you cut it open, it'll be ready to eat. This bread lasts us about 3 days if we don't devour it by that time. The best way to preserve it is to cut only the amount that you're going to eat that night and then wrap the rest in saran wrap and maybe even a towel. You can put it in the fridge or leave it out on the countertop. Just make sure the air doesn't get to it if you want it to last a long time. Well, thank you so much for watching this video on how to make sourdough bread. I hope this was helpful. If you make sourdough bread, please share your pictures with me on Instagram or Facebook. I'd love to see them, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. If you're new to my page, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and like on Facebook, because every week I post a new farm-to-table eating, natural living, and our homemade lifestyle from our homestead here in Uvalde. Thank you so much for stopping by our homestead.